Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I moved from Oregon to a small town in Tennessee called Brimpton when I was 23 years old. It was one of those decisions you make when you're tired of everything familiar, when the weight of routine starts to feel like drowning in slow motion. Brimpton sat about an hour outside Knoxville, tucked between patches of woods and open fields that all started to blur together after a while. The kind of place where people still waved at strangers, and the only traffic jam was a tractor crossing the road during harvest season. I found the house through a rental listing online, and honestly, the price should have been my first warning. It was dirt cheap, almost suspiciously so, but I convinced myself it was just rural Tennessee economics. The house was a single story with 3 bedrooms and a basement I had no intention of ever using. It sat at the end of a thin road with no shoulder, just a gravel strip that led to the driveway with woods wrapping around the back like a heavy curtain. The place had that look like someone had cared for it once, a long time ago, then gave up halfway through a renovation they'd started with good intentions. Paint was flaking off the siding in uneven spots. The front step creaked like an old knee giving out, and the mailbox leaned at such an angle it looked like it wanted to escape. But it was private, gloriously private, and the landlord didn't ask many questions during our brief phone conversation. I signed a lease before I even saw the basement, which probably tells you something about my state of mind back then. The first couple of nights passed without incident. I spent most of my time unpacking the basics and pretending to organize. But really, I was just trying to feel normal again, trying to convince myself that this fresh start would actually mean something. Everything was quiet out there, and I mean truly, deeply quiet. No traffic humming in the distance, no neighbors yelling through paper-thin walls, no city sounds bouncing off concrete and glass. It was the kind of silence that makes you suddenly aware of your own breathing, of the sound your clothes make when you shift position, of how loud your footsteps really are on old hardwood floors. On the second night, something small happened that I almost dismissed entirely. I tried to shut the hallway bathroom door and it bounced back at me. Not hard, not violently, just like something was in the way, like you'd hit if you tried to close a door with a towel hanging over the top. But when I looked behind it, searching for whatever obstruction was causing the problem, there was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. I stood there for a moment, hands still on the doorknob, feeling foolish for even caring. I figured maybe the door frame was crooked or the latch was slightly off, just one of those quirks that old houses develop over decades of settling and shifting. The next day, I grabbed a screwdriver from my toolkit and messed with the hinges for a bit, tightening screws and adjusting the alignment. It didn't fix much. The door still resisted closing all the way, still had that strange resistance like invisible hands were gently pushing back. And now and then, maybe once or twice a day, I'd hear a soft thump from that direction, like a knock, but not quite, and I'd walk down the hall to find the door sitting slightly ajar again. Open just a few inches as if someone had recently walked through and forgotten to close it behind them. I kept telling myself it was just an old house doing what old houses do. They groan, they shift, they creak in the night. Wood expands when it's humid and contracts when it's dry. These are normal things, rational explanations that any homeowner could tell you. So I left it alone, tried not to think about it, tried to focus on making the place feel like home. A few days in, I got back from a grocery run with my arms full of bags, and I found one of the kitchen chairs sitting halfway down the hallway. Just one chair, not tipped over, not broken or damaged in any way. Just placed there in the middle of the hallway like someone had started to bring it somewhere, then forgot what they were doing or changed their mind mid-task. I froze for a second, standing in the doorway with a bag of eggs in one hand and some fruit in the other, just staring at this chair that had somehow migrated from the kitchen. I hadn't moved any of the chairs since I got there. I hadn't even eaten at the table yet, had been living off sandwiches and coffee and whatever I could make in one pan without much cleanup. I stood there, holding my groceries, feeling something cold settle in my stomach, like walking into a room and realizing something's missing but not being able to identify what. It felt weird, felt off, felt like the house was trying to tell me something in a language I didn't speak yet. I picked the chair up carefully, as if it might be hot or fragile, and returned it to the table without thinking much more about it. But that was when I started locking the doors, all of them. Even if I was just taking a shower or reading on the couch for half an hour. I couldn't explain why, couldn't point to any specific threat. It just felt necessary, like a precaution my body understood before my mind caught up. That weekend, around midnight when I was half asleep watching something forgettable on television, I heard what sounded like light footsteps on the back porch. Not heavy boots or deliberate stomping, more like the sound of bare feet brushing against old wood that hadn't been properly maintained in years. The steps were too soft to be an animal, I thought, too irregular in their rhythm to be anything with 4 legs. I muted the television immediately, held my breath for a second, and then grabbed the flashlight I'd started keeping on the kitchen counter within easy reach. My heart was hammering as I approached the back door, and when I finally looked outside, the porch was empty. Nothing there at all, just the still night air and the distant sound of insects. But the screen door was moving, just gently, swinging on its hinges like someone had let go of it only a few seconds before I looked. I hadn't touched that door since moving in, hadn't had any reason to. It hadn't been windy that evening either. The air was thick with summer humidity, the kind that sits on your skin like a warm blanket you can't shake off. I opened the main door, despite every instinct telling me not to, and stepped outside with the flashlight, shining the beam across the yard and into the trees. Just brush and branches, and shadows layered on top of each other. No movement that I could detect, no sounds except for one lone cicada chirping off somewhere too far away to matter. I told myself maybe a raccoon had bumped the door, or a possum, or a squirrel, something harmless and explainable. But even as I thought it, I didn't quite believe it. That night I left the hallway light on and sat in bed for a long time before sleep finally caught up with me, and even then my dreams were uneasy and filled with sounds I couldn't identify. Around 2 a.m, I woke up to the sound of the kitchen faucet turning on. Just a quick burst, like someone had flipped the handle up and let the water run for exactly 1 second before turning it off again. I didn't move at first, just lay there in the darkness trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. From my bed I could see the edge of the hallway through the open door. Could see that rectangle of light I'd left on for comfort. I stared at that empty patch of light for what felt like 10 full minutes, listening with every fiber of my being for any other sound, any indication of what had just happened. Nothing else came. Eventually I got up, moving slowly like I was underwater, and switched on the bedroom light first, then the hallway light, then finally the kitchen light. The faucet was off. No drips falling into the sink, nothing out of place that I could see. Every door was still locked. I checked them twice, rattling each knob to make absolutely sure. The windows were secure too. It didn't make sense, but there was nothing I could point to, nothing I could prove had actually happened. I didn't call the police because what would I even say? That the plumbing was acting suspicious? That I heard water run for 1 second in the middle of the night? The next day I found myself driving into town and camping out at this little coffee shop for most of the evening. I sat in the corner with a mug I didn't refill, scrolling through my phone and pretending to read articles. But really, I was searching for answers I didn't know how to ask for. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. Articles about how to tell if your house hates you. Nothing online really helped. Everything sounded either exaggerated or completely fake, and what I was dealing with didn't feel like that at all. It felt specific. It felt personal, like whatever was happening had only just started to notice me, had only just become aware of my presence in its space. That night, I left the kitchen light on again, telling myself it was a small comfort, but knowing deep down I was marking territory somehow, claiming space with artificial light. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up sweating through the sheets despite the temperature being reasonable. The room felt off, felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The air was still, but not calm, charged with something I had no name for. Then I realized my bedroom door was closed. I never closed it, not once since moving in. I needed to be able to see out into the hallway, needed that visual connection to the rest of the house. I sat up slowly, waited, watched the door handle in the dim light filtering through the curtains. And then I heard it. The knob turned, just a little, just enough to make that soft metallic click that door hardware makes when pressure is applied, like someone was gently trying it, maybe expecting it to be locked, maybe testing to see if I was awake. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my throat closed up. I whispered into the darkness, "Hello?" My voice sounded small and pathetic. Nothing answered. After about 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, I got up. I wasn't brave about it, wasn't charging forward with confidence. My legs felt like they were made of something unstable, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the door handle. But I opened it fast anyway, yanking it toward me like I could surprise whatever was on the other side. The hallway was empty. The kitchen beyond was dark, which stopped me cold because I distinctly remembered leaving that light on. The light I'd left on specifically for comfort, for safety, was now off. That's when I said it out loud to the empty house, to myself, to whatever might be listening. I need to get out of here. Just those words, quiet and flat, like admitting something I'd known for days but hadn't been willing to acknowledge. I packed the essentials into a duffel bag the next morning, moving with purpose now that the decision was made. Just clothes, wallet, phone charger, toothbrush, the things you need to function. Didn't take anything extra, didn't bother with sentiment. I drove into Knoxville and checked into a budget motel with flickering neon and a clerk who didn't ask questions. I emailed the landlord and told him I wouldn't be finishing out the lease. No explanation, no details, just that I was done. I paid through the end of the month and let it go, left that house sitting at the end of its gravel road, breathing in the dark, waiting for the next person who wouldn't notice the signs until it was too late. I was 22 when I signed the lease on a small house just outside of Marion, a decision I made mostly out of desperation and a desire for independence that probably outweighed my common sense. I moved in on a Saturday with my friend Jalen's help, his truck loaded down with my minimal possessions. A futon that had seen better days, a couple of milk crates full of clothes I'd accumulated over the years, and an old dresser I'd found on Facebook Marketplace for $30. The house had 2 bedrooms with pale green siding that looked like it hadn't been painted since before I was born, and a front porch that leaned forward at a slight angle like it was slowly sinking into the dirt road beneath it. The whole structure had this exhausted quality, like it was tired of standing upright after so many decades. My work shifts were mostly evenings, so I got used to coming home around midnight when the world felt emptied out and surreal. The town practically rolled itself up after 9 o'clock. No traffic moving through the streets, no porch lights left burning, no noise except for the occasional dog barking in the distance. Just me. My tired brain that felt stuffed with cotton after 8 hours of work, and whatever leftovers I'd managed to remember to pick up on the way home. The first strange thing was small, so small I almost dismissed it entirely. I came home one night and the hall closet light was on, glowing beneath the door. It was one of those little pull-string bulbs, the old-fashioned kind that you have to physically reach up and pull to activate. I hadn't even opened that closet door since I moved in. Hadn't needed anything stored in there yet. I turned the light off, tugging the string and hearing that distinctive click, and didn't think much of it beyond a vague sense of confusion. Maybe I'd done it without remembering. Maybe my brain was more fried than I thought. A couple of days later, the same thing happened. Light on again, door closed, string pulled down. Then I started noticing the kitchen drawer, the one where I kept random stuff like takeout menus and batteries and twist ties. It would be open an inch or two when I came home. Not every night, but sometimes, often enough that it started to register as a pattern. One morning, after a particularly rough shift, I found my toothbrush lying across the edge of the bathroom sink, damp like it had just been used. The bristles were wet. There was moisture on the handle. I live alone. No one else has a key to this place. I stood there staring at it for a long moment, my reflection looking back at me from the mirror with dark circles under bloodshot eyes. I chalked it up to stress or just being scatterbrained from the night shift schedule. Working nights does weird things to your memory and your perception of reality. You find yourself putting cereal in the fridge and milk in the pantry without realizing it until hours later. But still, that feeling crept in slowly, like cold water rising, that sensation that something was just a little bit off, just slightly wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Then came that Sunday when everything shifted. I had the whole day off for the first time in 2 weeks and decided to deep clean the bathroom. Just one of those spur-of-the-moment things you do when you're trying to feel productive and in control of your space. I was scrubbing under the sink on my hands and knees, trying to get rid of this weird, musty smell that wouldn't go away, no matter how much bleach I used, when I noticed something carved into the inside of the vanity door. At first, I thought it was just a crack in the wood, just natural aging and wear. But when I angled my head and looked closer with the light from my phone, I saw small, deliberate scratches, like someone had used a nail or a house key to painstakingly carve letters. It said, "Don't sleep in the back room." Not bold or dramatic, not carved deep with urgency. Just there, quiet and permanent, scratched into the wood like a note meant only for whoever happened to look closely enough. That stopped me cold. My hands went numb holding the sponge. I'd been sleeping in the back bedroom since day one, had specifically chosen that room because it was cooler than the front one and the windows didn't rattle as much when trucks passed on the road. I just sat there on the bathroom floor staring at those words for a long time, my mind trying to process what this meant, who had written it, and why they felt it was important enough to carve it where someone might never see it. Then I closed the cabinet door carefully, walked down the hall on legs that didn't feel quite steady, and moved all my stuff into the other room. No hesitation, no second guessing. I just did it, piling my clothes and sheets and pillows into the front bedroom like I was fleeing something I couldn't see. The front room wasn't great, wasn't comfortable. Got way too hot in the afternoon when the sun hit it directly, and it smelled a little bit like dust and old fabric no matter how much I cleaned or how many windows I opened. But I didn't care. I would rather be uncomfortable than ignore a warning that specific. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd found because I couldn't think of a way to explain it that didn't sound ridiculous or paranoid. How do you casually mention that your bathroom cabinet told you not to sleep in a certain room? 3 days later, I got home from work just after midnight like always. Same routine, same exhausted shuffle through the door, same habit of dropping my keys in the bowl by the entrance. I walked into the front bedroom where I'd been sleeping and stopped dead in the doorway. My bed, the one in this new room, was completely stripped, every pillow gone. Every blanket and sheet vanished like they'd never existed. Not crumpled on the floor, not thrown into a corner, just missing entirely. I searched everywhere with increasingly frantic energy, checked the laundry hamper, looked under the bed, tore through the closet, even went back to the old room thinking maybe I'd sleepwalked and moved them without remembering. Nothing, just a bare mattress sitting there looking obscene and exposed like it had never been made. Like I'd imagined the whole thing. That night I curled up on the couch with a hoodie I kept in my car and a throw blanket I found in the trunk, thin and scratchy, but better than nothing. I didn't sleep much, just dozed in fits and starts, jerking awake at every small sound the house made. After that incident, things spiraled in a way that made me question my grip on reality. One night I came home to find the bathroom faucet running full blast, water everywhere, overflowing the sink and pooling on the tile floor. I hadn't used that bathroom that morning, I was certain of it. My boots, which I always lined up neatly by the door because that's just how I am, were turned backwards, both of them, toes pointing in the wrong direction like someone had deliberately rearranged them. Another time, while I was eating dinner at the kitchen table, just sitting there with a sandwich and my phone, the refrigerator door creaked open behind me. I just sat there frozen with my sandwich halfway to my mouth, watching it slowly swing out like someone was standing there expecting me to get up and close it for them, like this was some kind of test or game I didn't understand the rules to. Then came the photo, and that's when everything crystallized into genuine terror. We had a storm one night, one of those sudden, heavy southern storms that knock out power for an hour or two and make the whole world feel like it's ending. Rain hammering the roof, thunder shaking the windows, lightning turning night into brief day. I went to check the breaker panel in the hallway closet, fumbling around with my phone flashlight trying to figure out which switches had tripped. While I was poking around in there among the cobwebs and old paint cans, I noticed something stuck behind the metal panel cover, just a corner of something peeking out. I pulled at it carefully, and it came free. It was a Polaroid, faded and slightly warped from moisture, the kind of photo that looks like it's been hidden for years, but the image was clear enough to make my blood run cold. It was a picture of the back bedroom, my old room, the one I'd been warned not to sleep in. The bed in the photo was stripped bare just like mine had been, just like what had happened to me. The walls were stained dark, like something had soaked through the plaster from inside, spreading outward in patterns that looked almost organic. And in the corner of the room, partially hidden by shadow, sat a girl, maybe 16 or 17 years old, curled up tight with her knees pulled to her chest. Her face was hidden behind her hands, so you couldn't see her expression, couldn't see if she was looking at the camera or hiding from it. Just the way her shoulders were hunched forward, the way her whole body seemed to fold in on itself, like she'd been crying for hours or days, like she'd given up on being found. Someone had written on the white border of the photo in that distinctive Polaroid space, written in small, neat handwriting that looked almost cheerful in its normalcy. This is where she stayed. I sat down right there on the hallway floor and stared at that photo for what felt like forever, my mind trying to process the implications, trying to understand what I'd stumbled into. The storm raged outside, but I barely heard it anymore. All I could see was that girl in the corner. All I could think about was how I'd been sleeping in that room for days before finding the warning. I didn't sleep that night at all. I stayed on the couch with every single light in the house turned on, even the ones in rooms I wasn't using. I even turned on the television just for the background noise, just to make the silence feel less sharp and oppressive, less like it was waiting for something. At some point around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the creaking of a house settling, not the scurrying of something in the walls or mice in the attic. These were measured steps, deliberate and heavy. Human footsteps. They started somewhere near the bedrooms, moved past the couch where I was curled up, pretending to be invisible, and stopped near the kitchen. That was it. That was all. No door opened afterward, no sound of anyone leaving or arriving, just those steps and then silence, thick and expectant. The next morning, when weak sunlight finally started coming through the windows, I found every kitchen cabinet standing open, every single drawer pulled out as far as it would go. All of my silverware was scattered across the floor in a messy, deliberate pile. Forks and spoons and knives mixed together, like someone had emptied the drawers while looking for something specific, or maybe just trying to send a message I was too stupid or too scared to understand. I finally broke down and called Everett, a guy from work. We weren't exactly close friends, didn't hang out or anything, but I remembered him mentioning once during a smoke break that he grew up in Marion, knew the area and some of its history. I told him I needed to ask him something about the house, tried to keep my voice casual and not let him hear the edge of panic. He came by that afternoon, clearly a little uncomfortable just being there, clearly picking up on something in the atmosphere. He didn't even sit down, just walked around quietly looking at the rooms with his hands in his pockets. Then he turned to me with this expression I couldn't quite read and asked, "You ever hear about what happened here?" I shook my head, my throat suddenly too dry to speak. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, like he knew the real estate agent had conveniently forgotten to mention certain details. "There was a girl," he said, his voice careful and measured. "About your age. Rented this place a few years back. Worked night shifts at the CVS off Eastview, kept to herself mostly. One day, she just stopped showing up to work, stopped answering her phone. Nobody heard from her for almost a week. After a few days, her manager got worried enough to call for a welfare check. Someone came out here. Cops, I think, maybe a landlord. House was locked up tight. No sign of struggle, no broken windows or forced entry. She was just gone. Vanished completely. I asked him what they found, even though part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to hear the answer. He hesitated, looking past me toward the hallway like he could see something I couldn't. Then he said quietly, "There was a stain in the back bedroom. Big one, dark. Looked like old blood that had soaked into the floorboards. But no body, no evidence of what happened. Nothing missing from the house. It went cold pretty fast. Her name was Leela." I showed him the Polaroid with shaking hands, held it out like evidence in a trial. "Is this her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at that photo for a long time, longer than seemed necessary, long enough that I almost regretted showing it to him. His face went pale and tight. Then he just gave one slow, deliberate nod before handing it back to me, like it burned to touch. I didn't go back to the house after that conversation. I packed a duffel bag right there while Everett waited by his truck, threw in whatever I could grab quickly. Left the key in the mailbox like I was fleeing a crime scene and texted the landlord a brief message letting him know I was gone and not coming back. Never told him why. Never explained. Some things you can't explain to people who haven't felt what you felt, who haven't seen what you've seen. That house still sits there on that street in Marion, waiting for the next person who needs cheap rent badly enough not to ask questions, waiting to see if they'll sleep in the back room before someone warns them not to. If you're still listening, you probably enjoy stories like this. A like or a comment helps keep them alive, helps me know you're out there in the dark with me. I was 28 when we bought the place in northern Georgia. Bought it in that optimistic way young couples do when they think home ownership will solve problems that have nothing to do with addresses or square footage. The realtor, a woman named Myra with a practiced smile and expensive shoes, told us an older couple had lived there for ages, decades probably. The husband had died a few years ago, she explained in that gentle tone people use when discussing other people's tragedies, and the wife had gone to live with her daughter somewhere in South Carolina. We closed in early April and moved in a week later on a day when the sky decided to open up and drench everything. It was raining so hard that our mattress got completely soaked while carrying it from the truck to the house, water running down our arms and backs, turning the whole process into a miserable comedy of error. We had to sleep on the couch for the first 2 nights while the mattress dried out in the spare room, cramped together and not in a romantic way. The couch smelled faintly of whoever had owned it before, like stale cedar and old aftershave, the kind of scent that lingers in furniture long after someone's gone, embedded in the foam and fabric in ways you can never quite get rid of no matter how much you clean. My partner's job was in Dalton, about an hour away through winding roads and small towns that all looked the same. They left early every morning while it was still dark and came home late when they were exhausted and not interested in conversation. I worked from home doing freelance editing, mostly articles and educational material. The kind of quiet work that makes the days blend together. Grammar and sentence structure, fact-checking and formatting, endless documents that all started to look identical after a while. The days were peaceful at first in that new house way where everything feels like possibility. I'd open the windows to let the breeze carry out the smell of previous owners, try to ignore the never-ending to-do list that came with buying an older home. We had peeling wallpaper in the hallway that looked like it was from the 70s. Water stains spreading across the ceiling above the guest bathroom like maps of countries that didn't exist, and one room that still smelled like cigarettes no matter how long we aired it out or how many candles we burned. That first week was just unpacking, figuring out where the sun hit in the mornings and which rooms stayed cool, which outlets actually worked and which were just decorative, which drawers stuck and needed to be lifted while pulling, all the usual new house discoveries. I wasn't looking for anything strange, wasn't expecting anything beyond normal old house quirks. I didn't even notice the crawl space door until the third or fourth day when I was carrying laundry down the hallway. It was a low square hatch near the laundry closet, the kind of door that makes you wonder what architect thought it was a good idea. No stairs leading down, just a drop-down panel with a metal latch and a wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. I assumed it led to some kind of under-house storage space or access to plumbing. It wasn't until I passed it one afternoon and noticed it was slightly open, maybe 2 inches, just enough to see darkness beyond, that I even gave it much thought. I shut it without really thinking about it, just pushed it closed and heard what I thought was the latch clicking into place. The next time I walked past, it was open again, a little wider this time, maybe 4 inches. I stopped and stared at it for a moment, that cold feeling starting in my stomach. I figured I hadn't latched it properly the first time, told myself that old house hinges shift and floors bow with temperature and humidity. Makes sense, right? Old houses do weird things. I closed it again, this time pushing hard until I definitely heard the click of metal on metal, the sound of the latch engaging properly. Later that evening, when I passed by with an armload of towels, it was open again, standing wide enough that I could see into the darkness below. I found a rubber door stop in one of our moving boxes the next morning, one of those wedge-shaped ones, and jammed it firmly in front of the panel. Left it there while I drove into town to pick up groceries, feeling ridiculous, but also strangely relieved to have taken some kind of action. I came back maybe an hour later with bags of food that needed to be put away, and found the hatch wide open again and the wedge sitting several feet away across the hallway like someone had casually kicked it aside. Nothing else was touched that I could see. The doors were still locked, front and back, the windows still shut tight with their old painted latches. I even checked the Ring camera we'd just installed by the front door, scrolling through an hour of footage. Nothing but squirrels running across the porch and a delivery truck passing on the road. No one had come in. No one had gone out. I stood there in the hallway with grocery bags cutting into my fingers, staring at that open darkness, and I felt something shift inside me. Not quite fear yet, but close. Concern mixed with confusion, that sense that the rules of reality were bending slightly around this house. I didn't say anything to my partner that night when they came home exhausted and hungry. I couldn't think of a way to explain it that didn't sound ridiculous or paranoid. "Hey, I think the crawl space is rejecting my attempts to keep it closed." It wasn't exactly casual dinner conversation. So I stayed quiet and tried to convince myself there was a rational explanation I just hadn't figured out yet. A few nights later, I was working in the back room around 9 o'clock. The house dark except for my desk lamp. We'd set up my workspace by the window so I could look out over the yard, though at night all I could see was my own reflection and darkness pressing against the glass. I was copy editing something incredibly dry. An educational packet about soil erosion or watershed management or something equally mind-numbing when I heard a noise above me. That wouldn't be unusual in most houses, wouldn't even register as noteworthy. But we didn't have an upstairs. This was a single-story house, just an attic space above with blown insulation and probably mice. At first the sound was like creaking, like wood expanding or pipes shifting with temperature change, all the normal sounds old houses make. But then it got more rhythmic, more deliberate. Heel to toe, slow and steady, the unmistakable pattern of someone walking. Not heavy stomps or random pops of settling wood, but deliberate movement, footsteps pacing back and forth directly over my head like someone was taking their time, walking slowly with purpose. I didn't move at first, just sat there with my hands frozen over the keyboard, blinking up at the ceiling and trying to convince myself I was hearing things. After a minute or so of this, I stood up slowly and walked the length of the house barefoot, not making a sound myself, checking everything. Every door was locked, every window shut tight. I told myself maybe the roof was settling, maybe an animal had gotten up there. A raccoon or a possum, something heavy enough to make noise. But it didn't sit right. The noise wasn't above the roof line, wasn't coming from the attic space. It was between floors, in a space that shouldn't exist because we only had one floor. 2 days later, I was organizing boxes in the laundry room, trying to sort out what we could toss and what needed to be kept, when I found the box. It was stuffed in the back of an upper cabinet behind a crumpled top and a stack of old paint cans crusted with dried drips. A cardboard box labeled in clean, careful handwriting. The kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who grew up before computers. It said, "Xmas lights do not open," in black marker, underlined twice for emphasis. Naturally, my curiosity got the better of my common sense, and I opened it anyway. Because that's what people do in situations like this, despite every horror movie telling us not to. Inside were 6 cassette tapes, wrapped carefully in tissue paper like precious artifacts, and a small spiral notebook with a red cover that had seen better days. The notebook was worn at the edges, but the writing inside was sharp and neat, precise in a way that felt obsessive. Each page was numbered, starting with day 1 in the top corner. The handwriting looked like something from an old address book, tight and slanted, all capital letters that marched across the pages in perfect rows. The tapes weren't labeled, just plain black plastic that could have held anything. I had an old cassette player stored somewhere in a tub of cords and cables from previous moves, the kind of thing you keep thinking you might need someday. I dug it out and popped in the first tape with hands that weren't quite steady. For the first 10 minutes there was nothing, just faint ambient noise that could have been breathing or wind or the hiss of old magnetic tape. Then a voice emerged from the static, low and dry and emotionless. "It's still down there," the voice said clearly. "I think it waits until I sleep." That was it. Nothing more. Just that one statement hanging in the air before silence returned. The next tape had more gaps of silence stretching out, then the same voice. It moved again. I didn't dream that. It was under the vent. And then later, after more waiting, "I don't think I can hold the door anymore." The voice never changed across any of the tapes. Always the same steady whisper, like he was sitting close to the microphone, watching something while he recorded, documenting something he knew no one would believe. I listened to 3 of the tapes sitting there on the laundry room floor with my back against the dryer. That was enough. I couldn't handle any more. That night, I left the box in the garage and didn't go near it again, didn't even want it in the house. The next morning, I passed the crawlspace door and something made me stop and look closer at the frame. I hadn't noticed before because I'd been focused on the hatch itself, but something had been scratched into the wood just inside the panel where you'd only see it if you got down on your knees and looked. Deep grooves carved into the wood, not carved for show or decoration, just gouged in quickly and desperately. It said, "Stay above," in letters that looked like they'd been made with a house key or maybe a nail. done by someone who was scared and running out of time. I ran my fingers over the grooves, feeling how deep they went. This wasn't new, wasn't recent. It was old and faded, rubbed down in some places like someone had run their hands over it 1,000 times for comfort or reminder. That night, my partner left for a work retreat, one of those mandatory team-building things they couldn't get out of. I stayed behind because someone needed to watch the house and I had work deadlines. They weren't fighting or anything. Relationships was fine. They just had to go, and I said I'd be fine for a couple of days alone. I turned on every light in the main rooms before the sun even set, double-locked the doors and checked them twice, set my laptop up on the couch with a comfort movie playing in the background. Some sitcom I'd seen 100 times that required no attention. I was determined to make the place feel normal again, to reclaim the space from whatever weirdness had been building. Around 2:15 in the morning, I got up for water, mouth dry from sleeping with my mouth open. I walked into the hallway and the crawl space hatch was standing wide open. No wedge in front of it, no warning, just open like an invitation or a threat. I stood there staring down into that darkness, and then I heard it. Breathing, short and panicked, like someone was hiding down there but couldn't quite stay quiet, couldn't control the fear enough to be silent. It was right below the floor, right beneath my feet. I backed away slowly, didn't turn my back on it, kept my eyes on that opening like it might follow me. I locked myself in the bedroom and sat with my back against the door until sunrise started painting the windows gray. When I finally found the courage to open the door, the hatch was closed again like nothing had happened. The wedge was back, but this time it was lying across the hall on the opposite wall, like someone had deliberately tossed it there just to make a point, just to show me they could. I didn't touch it, didn't touch anything. My partner came home that night and found the box while looking for camping gear in the garage, walked in holding it and asking casually if it was mine. I didn't even pretend or make excuses. I told them everything. Every detail, every strange occurrence, everything I'd been too scared or too embarrassed to mention before. That night, we packed bags and drove to a motel in Jasper without looking back. We only went back to the house once, in bright daylight, with friends as witnesses, to get the rest of our stuff and anything we couldn't bear to leave behind. We sold the house 2 months later for a loss we couldn't really afford, sold it to a young couple who seemed so happy and excited. I wanted to warn them, but my partner stopped me, said it would kill the sale and we needed out. Sometimes I wonder if they found the box, if they heard the footsteps, if they figured out what stay above meant before it was too late. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all. Try to pretend that house doesn't exist in northern Georgia. Still breathing, still waiting, still keeping something locked beneath its floors. After the breakup in Winston, long and drawn out and exhausting in the way relationships end when nobody's really done anything wrong, but nothing's really right either, I didn't have the energy to stay in a town full of reminders. Every street corner held a memory. Every coffee shop was somewhere we'd sat together. Every bar was filled with people who wanted to ask how I was doing in that careful tone that made me want to scream. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I didn't have to bump into anyone who knew me or knew what happened or had opinions about whose fault it was. I found a place in Bell Ridge through a rental website, one of those services that matches people with spare rooms or empty houses. It wasn't much to look at from the photos, just a small one-bedroom at the end of a gravel road. But the price was reasonable, and the landlord didn't ask many questions, which suited me just fine. When I first walked through it during my initial visit, I remember noticing small things that should have been red flags, but that I explained away because I needed somewhere to land. The windows had this weird way of not quite latching properly. You had to jiggle them just right to get them to lock. There was a water stain on the living room ceiling that looked vaguely like a face if you stared at it long enough, and one of the bedroom closets wouldn't stay closed without something wedged in front of it. At first, that stuff made me laugh a little. made me feel like I was claiming character and quirks instead of acknowledging problems. I told myself it gave the place personality. I painted a couple of the walls in colors I chose myself, colors nobody else had opinions about, cleaned out the fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years, swept out decades of ash and debris until my lungs hurt. About 6 weeks after moving in, I came back from the grocery store with my arms full of bags and noticed the kitchen drawers were open. Just a few of them, barely cracked really, like someone had started going through them looking for something but stopped halfway through their search. I stood there in the doorway holding organic vegetables and pasta I couldn't afford, trying to retrace my steps in my mind. Had I opened them earlier that morning? Maybe I'd left them that way while looking for the can opener or a measuring cup. I was tired. It had been a long day. Exhaustion makes you forget small actions. So I closed them without thinking too much about it and moved on with my evening. But after that, I started noticing other things. Small things that accumulated like snow building into something heavier. A spoon appearing on the counter that I didn't remember using, sitting there, clean but present, like it had materialized from nowhere. My Bluetooth speaker, which always sat on the top shelf in the living room where I'd carefully placed it, randomly sitting on the floor one afternoon when I came home from a walk. One day when I got back from running errands, a roll of paper towels that I swore had been almost full the day before was suddenly gone. Like vanished without a trace, gone. Not in the trash, not under the sink or behind the toilet, not anywhere I could find. Just missing entirely, like it had never existed. Still, nothing felt malicious or deliberately threatening. No broken windows with glass scattered across the floor, no signs of forced entry with damaged locks or scratched paint. The doors were locked every single night, and I checked them obsessively, sometimes 2 or 3 times before bed. I figured I was just a little off mentally, maybe depressed and not tracking my own actions properly. Maybe I was sleepwalking, doing things in the night I didn't remember. Or maybe the drinking I'd been doing in the evenings to help me sleep, just a couple glasses of wine or a few beers, maybe that was making me more forgetful than usual, making my memory unreliable. By the time the leaves started to change and fall began settling over Bell Ridge, I'd basically talked myself out of any real concern. I mean, what else could it be, really? Every logical explanation pointed to me being the problem, to my mental state being compromised by heartbreak and loneliness. Then December rolled in, and with it came the sounds from the attic, soft sounds that you could almost ignore if you tried hard enough. Nothing dramatic at first, no footsteps or banging that would force you to pay attention, just light creaks now and then, subtle enough that you could convince yourself it was the wind or the house settling the way old houses do. The attic wasn't a real usable space, wasn't a bedroom or storage area that you could walk around in. Just a cramped crawl space with a low ceiling and exposed beams and insulation that probably hadn't been replaced since the house was built. I'd tossed a couple of boxes up there during the move, just things I didn't need immediate access to. Some old clothes that didn't fit anymore but I couldn't bear to donate, photo albums from when I was a kid, a box of my dad's stuff from his garage that I hadn't had the heart to go through after he died. I assumed the sounds were mice finding their way in from the cold, or maybe a squirrel that had discovered a gap in the eaves. Bell Ridge is the kind of place where you're never more than 100 yards from something with fur and teeth, where nature presses close to human spaces without much barrier. I thought about setting traps, but I wasn't really eager to climb up into that cramped, dusty space and deal with whatever I might find there. Wasn't eager to see a dead animal or have to dispose of something. Then sometime in early February, when winter was at its coldest and darkest, I found a half-eaten jar of peanut butter sitting on the basement stairs. Not on a shelf where it might have been stored, not on the floor where it might have fallen. On the 3rd step from the bottom, lid off, spoon inside still coated with peanut butter like someone had been eating it recently. I just stood there at the top of the basement stairs, staring down at it, my mind trying to process this impossible object. I hadn't been down in the basement in weeks, maybe months. It wasn't really functional as a living space. Just bare cement floor and walls, a water heater that groaned and rattled, and a broken dryer I'd been meaning to get hauled out to the curb for bulk trash pickup. I'd never once brought food down there, had no reason to. But there it was, clear as day, my jar of peanut butter from the kitchen cupboard, half empty with a spoon stuck in it. That's when I stopped sleeping all the way through the night, when my subconscious started refusing to let me rest completely. One night in March, when the weather was starting to warm, but night still came early and dark, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sharp clatter. Not loud enough to be described as a crash, but distinct enough to pull me fully awake. Like plastic hitting wood, like something falling or being dropped deliberately. I grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand where I'd started keeping it within easy reach and did a slow walk through the house, with my heart hammering. Everything looked normal in that surreal 2 a.m. way where familiar objects look strange and threatening. Nothing out of place in the kitchen, nothing disturbed in the living room. Until I looked up at the ceiling in the hallway and saw it. The attic hatch, which was supposed to be flush with the ceiling, was open, just slightly, just enough that the edges weren't flush like they usually were, maybe an inch of gap showing darkness beyond. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you were looking straight at it, if you were searching for something wrong. I stood directly under it for a long time with my flashlight aimed up at that opening, my hands shaking enough that the beam wavered. I couldn't see anything beyond the edge, just dark, just the promise of space above. And the air felt off somehow. Felt cooler, like the insulation up there wasn't doing its job anymore, like cold was leaking down from above. I didn't own a ladder tall enough to reach it properly, and I wasn't about to drag a kitchen chair over and poke my head up into who knows what in the middle of the night. That seemed like the beginning of a story that doesn't end well. Instead, I went back to my room, locked the door from the inside for the first time since moving in, and slept with the flashlight next to me in the bed like a child afraid of monsters. The next morning, I called a pest control company, found their number in the phone book, and tried to keep my voice steady while explaining the situation. Told them I thought maybe I had raccoons or squirrels, or something worse up in the attic, made it sound routine and manageable. The guy who showed up was middle-aged and chatty, friendly in that professional way service people have. At first he made small talk about the weather and how busy they'd been this season, but when he went up into the attic, climbing a ladder he'd brought with practiced ease, his whole demeanor changed. The chattiness stopped. When he came back down, maybe 20 minutes later, his face was different, pale, troubled, like he'd seen something that changed his assessment of the situation entirely. He said there were food wrappers up there, scattered across the insulation like someone's personal trash pile. Couple of ratty blankets, the cheap kind you can buy at dollar stores, wadded up in one corner. Even an empty can of beans with the lid peeled back, sitting there among the debris like evidence at a crime scene. Told me quietly that it looked like someone had been sleeping up there, living up there maybe. Might have been a squatter before you moved in, he offered, though he didn't sound even remotely convinced by his own theory, his voice carrying doubt in every word. He looked me straight in the eye with concern that felt genuine and said, "You should probably call the sheriff just to be safe. This is beyond pest control." So I did exactly that, called the non-emergency number with trembling hands. A deputy showed up that same afternoon, arriving in a cruiser that looked oversized on the narrow road. His name was Givens, I think, or Gibson, something like that. He was calm and professional in that way law enforcement tries to be reassuring, but the second he stepped into the attic after I showed him where it was, after he climbed up with his flashlight and duty belt creaking, he stayed up there for more than just a few minutes. Long enough that I started to panic, long enough that I imagined all sorts of terrible scenarios. When he finally came back down, his face was tight and controlled. He asked if I lived alone, and I told him yes. Asked how long I'd been there, and I said about 8 months. Said it like an admission of guilt somehow. He nodded once with that professional cop nod and told me he needed me to come with him to the station, said it wasn't optional, said it in a tone that made my stomach drop. They'd found more than just blankets and trash up there. There were notebooks filled with pages and pages of messy handwriting that looked frantic and obsessive. A jacket worn out but still intact like someone treasured it. A pair of boots with dried mud caked into the soles, mud that could probably be traced back to the property. A hunting knife tucked carefully into a rolled-up towel, the blade clean but present, and a second phone that wasn't mine, a phone with a burnt orange case and a cracked screen spider-webbed across. It was still charged, still functional, still containing God knows what information. Whoever had been up there wasn't just squatting temporarily, wasn't just passing through looking for shelter for a night or two. They'd been living there for months, maybe the entire time I'd been in the house. The attic didn't lock from the inside, had no way to secure it. That meant whoever it was had to come down when I wasn't home, had to navigate through the house to access food and water and the bathroom, or when I was asleep, vulnerable and unaware. They must have watched me closely enough to know my schedule. Must have known when it was safe to move around, must have listened to me through the ceiling and learned my patterns. The prints they lifted from various surfaces up there belonged to a man named Grady Miller. I'd never heard that name before in my life, but he had a record that the deputy showed me on a computer screen. Started with simple break-ins and trespassing, escalated to assault with a weapon, then a kidnapping charge that somehow got thrown out due to lack of evidence or a technicality. He'd served time at a low-security facility somewhere near Camden and had been released less than a year before I moved into the house. Maybe he'd been staying there even before it was rented to me. Maybe he thought of it as his place. They never found him, never caught him. He was gone by the time the sheriff's department got involved. Vanished like he'd never been there. But they found other signs that made my skin crawl. Signs in the woods directly behind the house, evidence of someone camping or watching. Cigarette butts of a specific brand ground into the dirt, trampled underbrush, creating paths, a little clearing maybe 30 yards back with a perfect view of my back windows. A place where someone could sit for hours and watch without being seen. After the police packed up their evidence and left me alone in that house, after they said they'd patrol the area more frequently but couldn't promise protection, I didn't sleep there again. Not one more night. I packed a bag with shaking hands and drove straight to my cousin Lana's place in Waverley. Showed up on her doorstep without calling first, and she took one look at my face and let me in without questions. The house was just outside a town called Miller's Hill, tucked along one of those winding Tennessee back roads where everything looks like it's been frozen in time, like it's been there for 50 years longer than it actually has. Trees pressing close on both sides, houses set back so far you barely notice them, the kind of place where you could disappear and nobody would think much of it. I'd moved in 3 days earlier and was trying to work through a checklist I'd made for myself, just boring organizational stuff to help me feel grounded and in control. First task was to check all the cabinets and shelves against the home inspector's notes, making sure everything matched up, making sure nothing had changed between inspection and move-in. I figured the kitchen was the best place to start since it was clean and manageable. Wasn't as overwhelming as thinking about the attic or the garage, with their decades of accumulated mystery. I moved through each cabinet methodically, opening doors and checking hinges, lightly pushing them closed and watching how they aligned or didn't align. There's something genuinely calming about the rhythm of it when you let yourself sink into the process. Simple and tangible, giving you the illusion that you're settling in, that you're taking ownership of a space. It gave me something to focus on, besides the anxiety of living alone in an unfamiliar place. Then I got to the cabinet beside the refrigerator, and something stopped me. The latch was angled slightly downward, maybe 15 degrees off from where it should be. Not a huge thing, not something most people would even notice. Barely noticeable if you weren't paying close attention, but I was paying very close attention because that's the kind of person I am. I always leave latches facing the same way when I close cabinets, rounded end pointing straight horizontal, creating a clean line that satisfies something in my brain. It's just a habit, probably borderline obsessive. I remembered adjusting that particular latch during the final walkthrough before closing, remembered how it had clicked into place with that satisfying mechanical sound. So seeing it off kilter now, seeing it wrong, it set off a small alarm in my brain that I couldn't quite silence. I tightened the screw with a screwdriver from my bag, nudged the latch back into position carefully, and chalked it up to the house settling or just normal quirks of an older structure. No big deal, I told myself firmly. At least that's what I tried to convince myself. Tried to push away the small voice saying this wasn't normal. After finishing the kitchen, I moved down the hallway to check the closet shelves, continuing with my methodical inventory. That's where the weird feeling really started to creep in, where things shifted from odd to unsettling. I opened the hall closet and saw my toolbox sitting there on the top shelf. Big red metal toolbox, a little dented on the corner from years of use, impossible to miss. That stopped me completely. I'd carried that thing into the house on move-in day myself, I remembered it clearly, because my arms were giving out from carrying boxes. I specifically remember dropping it onto the bottom shelf because I physically couldn't lift it any higher, because my muscles were screaming. It's not light, probably 40 pounds loaded with tools. Definitely not something I'd absent-mindedly lift above shoulder height without noticing the effort, without remembering. Still, I tried to explain it away, tried to find a rational answer. I checked for dust on the top shelf, looking for evidence. There was a perfect rectangle of dust up there, undisturbed edges showing where something had sat for a long time. But it didn't match the footprint of my toolbox. It was too small, wrong dimensions entirely. Whatever used to sit on that shelf was gone now, and my toolbox had somehow taken its place. I moved it back down to the bottom shelf with both hands, feeling the weight of it, trying to convince myself I'd somehow done this without remembering. But I couldn't make myself believe it, couldn't construct a scenario in my mind where I'd done this and forgotten. Then I went to the laundry room at the back of the house to continue setting things up. I keep my cleaning supplies organized in a white plastic bin. Nothing fancy. Just one of those cheap ones with the cut-out handles on the sides that you can buy anywhere. I always leave it in the same spot, tucked against the back wall behind the washer where it's out of the way but accessible. It's just how I am. Everything has a place. When I reached for it that afternoon, the bin was gone from its usual spot. My stomach did a little flip. I found it almost immediately, though, sitting right near the door instead of the back wall. It had been rotated exactly 90 degrees, turned from its original orientation, and inside the bin, every single bottle of cleaning product had been arranged, standing perfectly upright in a single vertical line like someone had taken the time to carefully organize them. Glass cleaner, degreaser, bleach, all-purpose spray, all standing at attention like soldiers. The bleach was sitting at the top of this neat line, which struck me as strange because that particular bottle leaks if you tilt it wrong, has a crack in the cap that I keep meaning to replace. I checked the floor expecting to see a puddle or at least drip marks, some evidence that it had been moved carelessly. Nothing. Floor was completely dry. And the dust where I usually kept the bin sitting against the back wall, that dust hadn't been disturbed at all. No drag marks through it, no signs that anything had been pulled across the floor. Just a clean, undisturbed space where my bin should have been, like it had been lifted and carried rather than dragged. That's when I started to slow down my inspection, when my movements became more cautious. Still, I kept going, stubborn or stupid or both. I told myself I must have moved these things without properly noticing, told myself I was tired and distracted. Maybe I was more flustered than I realized. Maybe the stress of moving was affecting my memory. But the explanations were starting to feel thin and unconvincing, were starting to feel like lies I was telling myself. Later in the afternoon, I turned my attention to the attic, remembering that the inspector had made a note about the tension rods on the pull-down ladder needing adjustment. I grabbed a screwdriver from my mysteriously moved toolbox and pulled the ladder down, climbing up slowly with the caution of someone who doesn't quite trust the structure, more out of habit than curiosity, just wanting to check one more thing off the list. The attic was mostly empty as expected, just dry wood and pink insulation and that distinctive smell of heat and dust. 2 wooden crates sat in the far corner, left behind by whoever lived here last. They looked old, but not ancient, maybe from the 70s or 80s based on the construction. One was closed with a metal latch that had rusted slightly. The other was wedged slightly open, the lid not quite flush. I gave in to curiosity and opened the latched one first, my hands leaving prints in the dust on the lid. Inside was a small portable cassette player, the kind with the big clicky buttons that were popular decades ago. The corner was dented like it had been dropped, and it looked like it hadn't been touched in years, dust coating every surface. Definitely wasn't mine. Definitely belonged to a previous owner. The second crate held a folder, just loose papers, maybe 50 or 60 sheets stacked unevenly. I flipped through a few with growing unease and saw rows of names written in neat handwriting, each one followed by a precise check mark. No addresses accompanying the names, no notes or context, no dates, just names and check marks, page after page. None of them were familiar to me, just random names that meant nothing. I put the folder back with hands that weren't quite steady, pushed the lid closed on both crates, and climbed back down the ladder faster than I'd gone up. When I stepped back into the hallway and turned around, I stopped cold and felt my heart drop into my stomach. The toolbox was back out, was sitting in the middle of the hallway floor, perfectly aligned with the doorway like it had been placed there deliberately, like someone had positioned it with care. I hadn't even been gone that long. Maybe 45 minutes total. And I knew for an absolute fact that I had put that box back on the bottom shelf of the closet and shut the door firmly, had heard it click. I picked up the toolbox with trembling hands, examining it like it might provide answers. Same weight, same chipped paint on the handle, same scratch across the lid that I'd made years ago. It was definitely mine. No question. But now it was here in the hallway, just waiting for me like a message or a test. This time I shut it back inside the closet and slammed the door so hard I heard the hinges complain and protest, heard something inside the closet shift. I needed to calm down before I lost it completely. So I went to the kitchen and grabbed the inspection packet, just looking for something rational to ground myself. Something with ink and paper and official stamps and dates. Something that existed in the normal world. I flipped to the last page where I'd written notes earlier that morning in my own handwriting, notes about cabinet measurements and electrical outlets. Except those notes were gone, completely erased or covered. In their place, someone had written the word checked over and over again, filling every single line from top to bottom, margin to margin. Checked, 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 checked. Dozens of times in handwriting that looked disturbingly, uncannily like mine. Same angle of the letters, same shape to the curves and lines, same style entirely. But the pressure was wrong, was noticeably different. I press hard when I write. My pen leaves grooves in the paper beneath, leaves an impression you can feel with your fingers. These marks were faint and light, almost shy in their application, like someone copying the way I write but without the confidence, without the pressure. Like someone had traced my handwriting or practiced it carefully. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper with shaking hands and walked toward the living room, needing to sit down. That's when I saw it and my breath caught in my throat. The cleaning bin that I'd found by the laundry room door, that I'd carefully returned to its proper place, was now sitting on the coffee table in the living room. Same white bin, same bottles inside, same weird, precise arrangement with everything standing upright. That leaky bleach bottle still positioned at the top of the line, perfectly upright as if mocking the laws of physics. The laundry room door was still open. I could see it from where I stood. I walked back slowly, not rushing. Didn't want to spook whatever was happening like it was an animal that might attack if startled. I returned the bin to exactly where it had been that morning, positioned it with deliberate care. Then I tried calling the realtor, a woman named Dana who'd handled the sale. Straight to voicemail, her cheerful recorded voice telling me to leave a message. I left a quick, awkward message asking if she knew anything about the crates in the attic, trying to keep my voice casual and not panicked. Not 10 minutes after I hung up, my phone buzzed in my pocket and made me jump. Caller ID said it was the house landline calling me, showed the address I was standing in. I hadn't set up the landline yet, hadn't even looked at the phone jack. There shouldn't be a dial tone, shouldn't be any service connected. I answered anyway, because what else was I going to do? My hand holding the phone so tight my knuckles went white. What I heard wasn't a voice, wasn't static or a wrong number or a confused technician. It was a slow, soft tapping sound, deliberate and rhythmic, like someone gently tapping their fingernail or maybe a pen against the plastic receiver. Tap, 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 evenly spaced, almost thoughtful in its rhythm, almost patient. It went on for about 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes before the line went completely dead. Just empty silence. I stood there for a long moment staring at my phone screen like it might explain what just happened, like it might tell me I was crazy and imagining things. Then I walked back toward the attic, driven by some compulsion I didn't understand. The ladder was still down, folded open into the ceiling where I'd left it. I pulled it down again and climbed back up with my heart hammering, not even sure what I was looking for. When I got up there and looked at the corner where the crates were, everything had changed. One crate was standing open, the lid propped against the wall. The cassette player I'd seen before was completely gone, vanished like it had never existed. The folder was now sitting on top of the other crate instead of inside where I'd left it, partially open like someone had just been looking through it, like I'd interrupted them in the middle of reading. I didn't touch anything this time, didn't want to. Just closed both crates again with shaking hands, climbed back down, and folded the ladder away. After that, I went through the entire house top to bottom, every cabinet and every drawer and every closet, not looking for anything in particular. I just needed to know where things were, needed to feel like I understood the space, like I was the one in control here. Everything seemed fine, everything appeared normal, until I reached the back door. The deadbolt was unlocked, sitting in the open position. That one detail made my stomach turn and filled my mouth with the taste of metal. I had locked that door this morning. I absolutely remember checking it. I have a specific routine, always have. Lock the doors, check them twice, then check them again before I can relax. It's just how I am, probably anxiety-related. I relocked the bolt slowly, hearing the metal slide into place with a solid thunk. Then I flipped it again just to test it, to make sure it was working properly. It moved easily like nothing had happened, like there was no mechanical problem that would explain it unlocking itself. And maybe nothing had happened. Maybe I was losing my mind. But it didn't feel that way. It felt deliberate. I went back to the kitchen and picked up that final page of notes again, held it under the overhead light to examine it more closely. On the back of the page, written in that same strange soft handwriting that mimicked mine, was a new list of names. The first few matched exactly the ones I'd seen from the attic folder, matched perfectly, and the last name on the list, written in slightly darker ink like it had been added most recently, was mine. My full name, spelled correctly, sitting there at the bottom of a list I didn't understand. That was the line for me. That was the boundary I couldn't cross. I folded the paper slowly and carefully, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, and left. Just walked out the front door, pulled it shut behind me, and waited for the latch to click. That click felt solid and real. Felt like the world was still holding together, even if barely. I drove into town that same afternoon and bought new locks at the hardware store. Heavy deadbolts and a steel security bar for the back door. Spent money I didn't really have but couldn't afford not to spend. Back at the house, I installed every new piece of hardware before I even sat down to rest, following the instructions carefully, testing each lock multiple times. Then I packed the folder and the attic papers and those strange crate items into a cardboard box and sealed it shut with packing tape, wrapped it like I was mailing something dangerous. I don't know what any of it meant, don't know who made those lists or why my name was added. But I know I don't feel safe there anymore. Know that something in that house isn't right. The locks help me sleep at night, but I still wake up at odd hours. Still check to make sure the doors are locked. Still listen for sounds that don't belong. I tell myself it was all explainable. Tell myself I was just stressed and seeing patterns that weren't there. But late at night, when the house is dark and silent, I don't believe that at all. I've been renting for over a decade, moving through a series of increasingly depressing places. Basement apartments where you could hear every footstep from above. Noisy duplexes with paper-thin walls where neighbors' arguments became your entertainment. A 2-year stint in a converted garage that somehow still haunts my lower back with its terrible mattress on concrete floor. Finally, after years of budgeting and bouncing between jobs that never quite paid enough, I scraped together enough money for a down payment and bought an actual house. The price had been suspiciously low for the area, low enough that I asked the realtor 3 times if there was something wrong with it. But the inspection came back clean, no problems, no foundation issues that would cost thousands, no major electrical problems that would require rewiring. The seller was a quiet guy in his late 50s who seemed eager to be done with the place. Said he'd moved out of state for a job opportunity. He said he hadn't actually lived there much the last couple of years. Claimed he'd just been using it for storage while he worked elsewhere. I moved in the second week of May with my 2 dogs, Bear and Murphy, my mattress, and about a dozen boxes that held what little I owned after years of renting furnished places. First night I slept on the floor with the dogs curled up beside me, their warmth more comforting than any furniture. It felt good in a way I hadn't expected. Felt like a reset button on my entire life. I remember thinking how quiet the area was, how peaceful. No traffic noise at all hours, no upstairs neighbors stomping around at 2 a.m., no sirens screaming past every 20 minutes. Just the occasional owl hooting in the distance and the wind moving through the trees out back. The first 2 weeks were completely normal, were actually kind of peaceful and hopeful. I fixed a loose fence post so the dogs could run in the backyard without me worrying about them escaping, swapped out a busted bathroom light fixture that flickered constantly, installed a new mailbox because the old one was literally hanging by one screw, and started unpacking slowly, taking my time to make the place feel like it was actually mine. The dogs adjusted fast, faster than I did, honestly. They're used to new environments after years of moving with me from place to place. But by week 3, they started acting strange in ways I couldn't ignore. It started with a weird bundle I found behind the water heater when I was cleaning. I wasn't even looking for anything in particular, wasn't on some kind of investigation. I was just clearing out cobwebs and dead bugs, trying to figure out what pipes went where in case something ever broke. I noticed something tucked way back in the corner where you'd never see it unless you really looked, hidden in shadow. It was wrapped in a dirty piece of what looked like canvas or old linen tied shut with what I swear to God was human hair. Not rope, not twine, but actual hair twisted together, brittle and sun-bleached but still holding strong. The knot was tied tight, had been there a long time based on how the hair had embedded into the fabric. I probably should have just left it alone, should have pushed it further back and pretended I never saw it. But of course I didn't, because humans are stupid and curious. I opened it carefully, unwrapping the fabric like I was defusing a bomb. Inside were a few small items that made absolutely no sense together. A worn child's shoe, tiny, about the size a toddler would wear, leather cracked with age. A smooth coin that was completely blank on both sides, like someone had deliberately sanded the face off, erasing whatever it had been. And what I'm pretty sure were teeth, small and sharp. Definitely not human teeth. Too small, too pointed. Maybe from some animal, but I didn't examine them long enough to be sure. Didn't want to touch them more than necessary. I honestly didn't look at any of it for more than 30 seconds before my skin started crawling. I just wrapped everything back up quickly, walked it straight to the outdoor trash bin, and tossed the whole bundle in without ceremony. I remember standing there afterward, wiping my hands on my jeans over and over, even though I hadn't touched anything directly, trying to wipe away the feeling of wrongness. That night, the dogs refused to go into the hallway that led to the bedrooms and laundry room. Just stopped cold in the living room like they'd hit an invisible wall, like something was blocking their path that only they could sense. I called them like normal, using my cheerful voice and patting my leg. Nothing, no response. Bear, my older dog who usually follows me everywhere, let out this low rumble I'd never heard from him before in 5 years of ownership. Deep and threatening, the kind of growl that raises the hair on your neck. And Murphy, my nervous rescue who's usually glued to my side, pressed herself against the back of the couch like she was trying to vanish into it, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her whole body was shaking. I walked down the hall myself, trying to show them it was safe. Every light turned on, making exaggerated casual movements. I checked each room thoroughly, looking in closets and behind doors. Nothing was out of place that I could see, everything exactly as I'd left it. I even said out loud to the empty house like an idiot, "See, nothing's there, you're being silly." But they still wouldn't come, wouldn't budge an inch past that invisible line they'd drawn. The next morning, it was the same thing. They wouldn't go near the back half of the house under any circumstances, treated it like enemy territory. Bear started sleeping under the kitchen table, and Murphy curled up behind the couch cushions where she could hide. That entire hallway might as well have been a cliff's edge, might as well have had a sign saying danger that only they could read. I even tried tossing treats down the hallway to coax them, their favorite expensive treats they usually go crazy for. Bear just sat down on his haunches and stared at me with what I can only describe as betrayal in his eyes, like I'd asked him to do something unconscionable. Then the lights started acting up in ways that couldn't be explained by simple electrical problems. First, it was the bedroom overhead light. It would flicker randomly, not in any pattern I could identify, then cut out completely for about 10 minutes before snapping back on like nothing had happened. A few days later, the living room lamp did the same thing, the one I'd bought specifically because it was supposed to be high quality. Eventually, the entire back half of the house developed this strange rhythm. Lights would flicker out and die, stay dark for anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes, then hum back to life suddenly like someone had flipped a switch. I figured it had to be bad wiring. Maybe rodents chewing through insulation in the walls, which happens in older houses. So I called an electrician, found one with good reviews online. He showed up the next afternoon, a middle-aged guy with a tool belt and confident manner. He took a thorough look at the electrical panel, checked every socket and switch in the house, tested outlets with his equipment. Eventually, he just shrugged in confusion and said everything looked weirdly clean for a house this old. No moisture damage anywhere, no frayed wires that would cause shorts, nothing loose or improperly connected. "Honestly," he said while closing up his testing equipment, "I've seen way worse setups in brand new builds. This is actually pretty solid work." Then he laughed and joked as he was packing up, "Maybe you've got a ghost messing with you." I laughed too, because what else do you do? But it didn't feel funny at all. Felt more like an accusation or a diagnosis I didn't want to accept. It was around that time I stopped sleeping well, stopped being able to rest through the night. Not insomnia, exactly where you can't fall asleep at all. More like I kept waking up at the exact same time every single night. Just after 3 a.m., like clockwork, like something was pulling me out of sleep on a schedule. I wouldn't hear anything specific, wouldn't have nightmares or disturbances. I'd just jolt awake with this tightness in my chest, like someone was pushing down on it, pressing the air out of my lungs. Pressure and panic without apparent cause. I'd lie there completely frozen for a minute or two, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, struggling to catch my breath like I'd been running. Then it would pass gradually and I'd be wide awake, completely alert, no possibility of falling back asleep. No dreams I could remember, no explanation for the panic, just suddenly up and wired with adrenaline. The dogs would be sitting upright in the corner of the bedroom during these episodes, not curled up peacefully the way dogs should sleep, not relaxed. Just sitting there rigid and alert, facing the hallway like statues, like they were standing guard or watching for something. And then I started hearing it, hearing the thing that made everything else make terrible sense. It was always the same sound, consistent and unmistakable once you'd heard it. A low, wet, dragging noise, like something heavy and damp being pulled across tile. It came from the direction of the laundry room, always late at night after the lights had flickered, always in that dead zone between midnight and dawn. The first time I heard it, I sat up in bed immediately and just listened with every fiber of my being. It didn't get louder or more aggressive, didn't move toward my room or toward me. It just paced back and forth, slow and deliberate, like whatever was making the sound was thinking or patrolling, maintaining some kind of routine. The dogs didn't bark during this, didn't make aggressive protective sounds. They whimpered, made these small frightened noises in the backs of their throats. Murphy climbed halfway onto the bed and shook until sunrise started lightening the windows, trembled like she was freezing despite the temperature being fine. After that first night, I stopped going into the laundry room at night under any circumstances. Wouldn't even walk past it in the dark. A few days later, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. The crawl space door was standing open. Just a crack, maybe 3 inches, but enough to see the darkness behind it that seemed deeper than it should be. When I'd moved into this house, that door had been sealed shut with layers and layers of old paint. Painted over so many times it was basically glued closed. I'd had to physically break the paint seal just to open it enough to check it during the home inspection, had used a utility knife to cut through the paint layers. I'd shut it afterward and hadn't touched it since. Hadn't had any reason to. Now it moved freely, swinging open easily like it had always been loose, like the paint seal had never existed. I shut it firmly and pushed a heavy storage box in front of it for good measure, a box filled with books that had to weigh 50 pounds or more. Something substantial enough that it wouldn't move on its own. The next morning, the box was sitting across the room, had somehow traveled about 8 feet. Just sitting there against the opposite wall like it had walked itself over there during the night. I stared at it for way too long. My mind trying to calculate how much force would be required to move it, trying to convince myself I'd somehow done it myself without remembering. But I hadn't. I absolutely hadn't. That box was filled with heavy hardcover books and old textbooks and power tools I'd stuck in there temporarily. Easily 40 or 50 pounds of dead weight. It doesn't just slide around on carpet, doesn't move itself. I moved it back in front of the crawl space door with effort, really pushed it tight against the wood. Then, without even thinking about what I was doing or why, I poured a line of salt across the bottom of the crawl space door. Just regular table salt from the kitchen, poured in a line like I'd seen in movies or read about in books. I don't believe in any of that supernatural stuff. Don't consider myself superstitious or religious. Just felt like the right thing to do in that moment, like something people do when they're out of rational options, when they're grasping at anything that might help. The salt held for 2 nights, stayed undisturbed in its perfect line. Then on the 3rd morning when I checked it, I found it had been swept into a perfect crescent shape. not scattered randomly by wind or footsteps, not walked through or disturbed carelessly. Just carefully curved, like someone had drawn it with the edge of their hand, had deliberately arranged it into an arc. Like something was mocking my attempt at protection, showing me it could rearrange my defenses any time it wanted. That's when I bought the camera, finally deciding I needed actual evidence or proof of what was happening. Basic motion sensor camera, nothing fancy or expensive, just something from the electronics store. I set it up in the laundry room facing directly toward the crawl space door, positioned it carefully and tested it multiple times to make sure it was working. That night, I stayed awake in the living room, sitting on the couch in the dark with my laptop open, waiting and watching the live feed to see if anything would trigger the motion sensor. Nothing happened for hours, just stillness and empty room. Next morning, I checked the saved footage with coffee in hand. The camera had been flipped face down sometime in the middle of the night, deliberately turned over. The footage ended abruptly at exactly 2:48 a.m., just cut off mid-recording. No movement visible before it stopped. No sound, no indication of what caused it. Just a sudden cut to black like someone had reached out and casually switched it off. That was enough for me. That was the final straw that broke through my stubborn determination to rationalize everything. That evening I didn't even hesitate, didn't try to tough it out one more night. I packed a suitcase with shaking hands, grabbed some essentials and important documents, and left for my sister's place across town. Showed up on her doorstep and asked if I could stay for a while without explaining why, because I didn't know how to explain it, didn't have words for what I'd been experiencing. She saw something in my face and just nodded, opened the door wider, and let me in. I never went back to that house for more than quick daylight trips to grab belongings, never spent another night there. Eventually sold it at a loss. Sold it to someone who probably thought they were getting a great deal and didn't ask enough questions. Sometimes I wonder what they found, if they found anything at all, if whatever was there decided to show itself to them, or if it's still down there waiting patiently in the crawl space. I was 28 when I moved to Tennessee after my life in Bridgeport fell apart in slow motion. Things had kind of unraveled all at once in that way major life changes do, where suddenly every support structure collapses simultaneously. The lease on my apartment came up for renewal at the worst possible time. My relationship, 6 years long with a shared dog and combined Spotify account and furniture we'd bought together, ended badly. I didn't want to couch surf with friends and pretend everything was fine, didn't want to move back in with my parents and admit defeat. And right when I was trying to figure out what came next, when I was at my lowest point, my Aunt Lena called out of nowhere. She owned a house outside a small town called Stonebrook, one of those places you drive through without noticing. Real quiet area, she said. Mostly just trees and maybe 2 gas stations serving a scattered population. I hadn't seen the house since I was a teenager, maybe 15 years ago during some family gathering I barely remembered. But I had vague memories of it being set way back off a gravel road, surrounded by woods that seemed to go on forever. She told me nobody was using the place currently, said I could stay as long as I wanted or needed to. Said she kept it specifically for family transitions, which was her polite, euphemistic way of saying emotional breakdowns, messy divorces, or people with tax problems who needed to disappear for a while. It sounded like exactly the kind of place where no one would ask how I was doing, where I could avoid painful conversations and just exist quietly while I figured my life out. The house was small but solid when I finally saw it. Just 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom with furniture that looked like it hadn't moved or been updated since the early 2000s. The kitchen had those fake wood laminate cabinets, the kind that peel if you spill anything hot on them, the kind that mark a specific era of cheap renovation. But the place wasn't abandoned or falling apart, wasn't some nightmare I'd have to make livable. It just felt paused, frozen in time, like someone had walked away mid-task and never come back. There were still canned goods in the pantry, green beans and corn with expiration dates from years ago. Sheets on the bed that smelled like they'd been sitting in a closed room for too long. Even a flashlight with working batteries in the drawer by the sink, like someone had prepared for emergencies and then vanished. I dropped my bags in the bigger of the two bedrooms and just stood there for a second in the silence, letting the quiet settle over me like a blanket. No upstairs neighbors stomping around, no street noise filtering through thin windows, no passive-aggressive notes appearing on shared refrigerators. It was weirdly comforting despite the strangeness, or maybe because of it. The first couple of weeks were peaceful in a way that made me realize how tightly wound I'd been for months, how much tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders and jaw. I didn't have a job yet, so I spent most of my days fixing little things around the house, small projects that made me feel useful, replacing old bulbs that had burned out, resealing the shower grout that was cracking and moldy, tightening the kitchen cabinet hinges so they stopped squeaking every time I opened one. The place slowly started to feel less like a leftover space and more like something that could potentially be mine, something I was claiming and improving. Then maybe 3 weeks in, I noticed something odd about the bedroom, something I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. It was the closet, specifically. Nothing dramatic or obvious, just slightly off-center in a way that nagged at me. I don't know why it caught my attention one random day, but I remember standing there brushing my teeth in the attached bathroom and staring at it through the doorway, thinking why would someone build it like that? It was positioned too far to the right on the wall, didn't line up with any logical structural reason. And when I opened it to investigate, it was only about 2 feet deep, which didn't make any sense at all. That wall backed into the same room I was standing in, should have shared the space. There should have been more depth, more storage. The dimensions didn't add up. Curiosity kicked in hard. I grabbed a tape measure from my small tool collection, the kind you get free with furniture assembly, and measured the bedroom wall from the corner to the edge of the closet. Then I measured the inside of the closet itself, being precise and careful. There were about 4 feet unaccounted for, just missing space that had to exist somewhere. At first I thought maybe there was some kind of crawl space or old utility access behind the wall, some practical explanation. The house was old enough to have weird quirks and strange architectural decisions made by people who didn't care about modern building codes. So I knocked along the wall inside the closet, moving my knuckles across in a grid pattern. Most of it gave that soft, hollow sound of drywall over empty space, that distinctive sound of tapping on nothing. But there was one section about chest height and maybe a foot wide that sounded completely different. Duller, more solid, like something was behind it that wasn't just air and insulation. I stood there for a long while, just holding my hand against that spot, feeling the texture of the wall, trying to decide what to do. I wasn't scared exactly at that point, was more curious than anything. And I had nothing but time, had nowhere to be, and no one expecting me. I ended up cutting out a small square of drywall using a utility knife I found in the kitchen junk drawer, just enough to peek behind and see what was there. That's when I found the first door, hidden behind the wall, like a secret. No knob on it, no visible hinges, just old raw wood wedged tightly into a frame like it had been fitted there carefully by hand. It didn't match any of the other doors in the house, was clearly much older. Maybe original to whatever structure had been here before renovations and additions. I pried it open with a flathead screwdriver and the edge of my palm, feeling the wood resist and then give way. Behind it was a short hallway, maybe 5 feet long at most. Couldn't have been much more. The walls were just plain drywall painted institutional white. No decorations or markings or personality. No lights installed, just darkness if I didn't have my phone flashlight. At the end of this strange hidden hallway was a second door, and this one did have a knob. Brass, tarnished with age, cold to the touch even though the house was warm. There was no sound coming from behind it that I could detect, no smell, no movement of air. Just stillness and the feeling that something was waiting on the other side. I opened it slowly, half expecting something to jump out or some horror movie moment. The room inside was tiny, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, a perfect square. No windows at all, no other doors, just 4 walls and a floor and a ceiling. Sitting in the center of the room was a single chair, plain wood, looked handmade and old. Positioned in front of the chair was a mirror, full length, leaning against the far wall like someone had placed it there deliberately. Nothing else in the space at all, no cobwebs even, no dust accumulation. Like someone had cleaned it recently, had maintained this hidden room for some purpose. Behind the chair, scrolled across the wall in thick black marker in handwriting that looked almost cheerful, were 4 words that made my blood run cold. Sit, wait, watch, until it copies. That's when I started feeling genuinely off, when the fear finally kicked in properly. Not scared exactly yet, but unsettled deeply. Like I'd walked into the wrong scene of someone else's story, like I'd opened a door I was never supposed to find. I stood there in that doorway for maybe 30 seconds, not moving, barely breathing, just staring at that message on the wall. Then I backed out carefully, shut both doors behind me, patched the drywall as best I could, and shoved the dresser in front of the entire closet. Blocked it completely, made it impossible to open without significant effort. I told myself it was just a weird leftover room, tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone's old meditation space from decades ago. Maybe my Aunt Lena had used it for storage way back when and forgot about it completely. I told myself all kinds of comforting lies, constructed elaborate explanations that made it seem normal or at least harmless. And that probably would have been the end of it. Probably would have just become a strange story I told at parties someday. But 2 nights later, around 1 a.m. when I should have been sleeping, I woke up to a sound that made my skin crawl. A soft creak, then another, the unmistakable sound of floorboards under pressure, the kind of sound you'd expect from slow, careful steps, from weight shifting deliberately. Except the steps weren't in my room, weren't anywhere I could see. They were behind the wall, coming from that space where the hidden hallway was. It sounded exactly like someone pacing slowly, walking back and forth in that narrow space. Not stomping or trying to be loud, not dragging or shuffling, just walking. Regular footsteps, heel to toe, back and forth like someone trapped or thinking or waiting. The next morning I checked the closet despite my fear, had to know if something had changed. Everything looked untouched on the surface. The dresser was still pressed tightly against it, hadn't moved an inch. Drywall was still sealed where I'd patched it, showed no signs of being disturbed. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, tried to convince myself I'd been dreaming or half asleep. But the pacing came back the next night, and the night after that. Not every night, which somehow made it worse, just often enough that I started dreading the silence, started waiting for it to begin. Sometimes I'd wake up just before it started, like my subconscious brain knew it was coming and was trying to warn me. The steps would go on for 5, maybe 10 minutes, then stop all at once. Abrupt silence, like whoever or whatever was back there didn't want to be heard too long, didn't want to give away too much. Then, one afternoon, I came in from stacking firewood outside, my arms sore and covered in dirt, and something was immediately wrong. The bedroom door was shut tight, closed completely. I never closed it, not once since moving in. Not ever. It wasn't a habit I had. I always left it open because I liked airflow, liked being able to see down the hallway. I stepped inside slowly with my heart already racing. The closet door was wide open despite the dresser, which had somehow been moved aside. Everything else in the room looked completely normal. Bed untouched, exactly as I'd left it. Window shut and locked, dresser drawers all closed, but that closet standing open like an invitation or a challenge. I walked over slowly on legs that felt unstable, half expecting to see something waiting inside, but it was just dark, just empty closet space. I pulled the drywall panel aside with shaking hands and looked into the hidden hallway. The narrow space was still there unchanged. At the end, the second door with its brass knob stood like it was waiting. I opened it, compelled by something I didn't understand, some need to know. The room looked the same at first glance, same small square space, except the chair had moved. It wasn't in the center anymore. It had been turned slightly to the right, maybe 15 degrees, like someone had sat in it and shifted their weight and then gotten up. The indentation wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. The angle was different. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed with the light on, fully dressed including shoes, waiting. At 2:14 in the morning, I saw what I'd been dreading. Movement in the far corner of the room, not big or obvious. Just something shifting slightly, like someone adjusting their posture in the dark, like a shadow that had weight. I sat bolt upright immediately and looked directly at that corner. There was nothing there when I focused on it, just empty space and familiar shadows. But I'd seen it. I knew I had. The next day I drove into town and bought a trail cam at the sporting goods store, one of those cheap hunting models that snaps pictures automatically when it senses movement. I set it up on a shelf across from the closet, aimed it carefully toward the wall where I knew that room was hidden. The next morning I checked the memory card with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. At 1:40 a.m. the footage showed something that made me feel like I was losing my mind. The recording skipped, just for a second, barely noticeable. Then it came back, and there was a figure standing directly in front of the closet. At first I thought it was some kind of glitch. The lighting looked weird and distorted. But then I leaned in closer to the small camera screen and my blood went cold. It was me, unmistakably me. Same hoodie I'd been wearing to bed, same pajama pants, even the same slightly uneven posture I have when I'm half asleep, when one hip sits higher than the other. But it wasn't me. I knew it absolutely wasn't me. I'd been in bed. I remembered lying there unable to sleep. The figure in the footage stared at the wall for several long seconds, completely still, not moving or breathing visibly. Then it took one deliberate step forward and disappeared behind the wall, passed through it like it wasn't there or like it knew exactly where the hidden door was. I should have packed my things right then and left immediately. Should have abandoned everything and run. But something about it pulled at me like an addiction. Like the room itself was waiting for something specific. That night, driven by compulsion I couldn't explain or resist, I opened the wall again. I walked through the narrow hallway with my heart pounding in my ears and opened the second door. I sat down in that chair in the center of the hidden room, positioned myself carefully. Then I just sat there in the darkness and silence, waiting, not even sure what I was waiting for or what I expected to happen. I moved out before the week was over, packed everything in a frantic rush, and didn't look back. Told my aunt the house had a serious mold problem, said I couldn't breathe right at night and it was affecting my health. Said I was grateful but needed to find something else. She seemed to accept this without question. Maybe had heard similar excuses before from other family members who'd stayed there. Now I live in a third-floor apartment with loud pipes that bang and neighbors who slam their doors at all hours of day and night. The noise used to bother me, but now I find it comforting, find it grounding, because at least I know what's making the sounds, know that it's just other humans living their messy lives, and I never, ever close my bedroom door anymore. Not ever. I need to be able to see out into the hallway, need to know that nothing is hidden in the darkness, need to know that I'm really alone when I think I am. I was 27 when I moved into a house just outside a little place called Wheaton, Tennessee. One of those decisions you make when everything else has fallen apart and you're just grasping for something different, somewhere new. I just packed what fit in my car, anything I could load in under an hour. left a note for the landlord in Atlanta explaining I wouldn't be back for my deposit, and started driving north before the city woke up and I lost my nerve. I didn't tell many people I was leaving, didn't really want to explain or justify. Sometimes you're not leaving for a better place or a better opportunity. You're just leaving for a different one, somewhere you can breathe without constant reminders of your failures. The house was a foreclosure I found online, bought it sight unseen for what felt like absurdly little money. No inspection beyond a few photos, no walkthrough to check for problems, just a list of minor repairs needed that seemed manageable. It looked like it had been empty for a significant while, long enough for the grass to grow wild and swallow the mailbox, long enough for birds to start nesting confidently in the eaves and claiming the porch as territory. But it was mine, actually legally mine. Cheap enough that I could afford it outright, isolated enough that I wouldn't have neighbors asking questions, and more or less standing upright, which was about all I could hope for. It sat at the end of a cracked gravel road that hadn't been maintained in years, one of those stubborn ranch-style places with red brick and a porch that leaned just enough to make you nervous walking across it. The backyard ran directly into about an acre of woods, trees, an undergrowth so dense and thick you couldn't see 10 feet into them, nothing but dead leaves and twisted branches creating shadows on top of shadows. Quiet, though. Incredibly quiet. You could hear yourself think out there, could hear your own heartbeat in the silence. I spent the first week just cleaning or trying to clean decades of accumulated filth. Every room had its own brand of grime and neglect. The kitchen smelled like mildew that had soaked into the walls. The bathroom mirror had this weird permanent fog that wouldn't wipe away no matter what I used, and I replaced floorboards that had rotted through in spots and cleared out dead bugs by the handful. I duct-taped a broken vent shut because it rattled loudly when the wind hit it at certain angles, sounded like something was trying to get in. All the normal stuff you'd expect in a foreclosed house, right? Just standard neglect and time taking their toll. By day 4, I thought I was doing okay, thought I was settling in and making progress, and then the back door started unlocking itself, and everything changed. At first I figured it was just me being careless, figured I was tired and distracted and not paying enough attention. The door was old, with wood swollen from years of humidity, with a stubborn brass handle and a deadbolt that needed some serious muscle to click into place properly. I remember locking it one night, really locking it, putting my back into the twist because it was so stiff. I even tugged on the knob afterward to check that it was secure, to make sure it had actually engaged. Next morning, when I walked past on my way to make coffee, it was wide open. Not cracked slightly, not ajar, just standing completely open like someone had deliberately opened it and walked through, like someone wanted me to notice. I stood there for a long time just staring out at the trees beyond, not moving, barely breathing. I didn't see anything out there in the woods, no movement, no wind that morning either, no birds making noise, just the stillness you only get in places far from other people. Eventually I closed it, locked it again with that same effort, and forced myself to move on with my day. Told myself I'd probably just been more exhausted than I realized, had probably not actually locked it despite thinking I had. But it happened again the next night, and then again after that. Just kept happening no matter how careful I was. I bought a new deadbolt at the hardware store, watched some basic YouTube tutorials on installation, and installed it myself with hands that shook slightly. It felt solid when I was done, felt better and more secure than the original. Next morning, the door was standing wide open again like before, like nothing had changed. That's when I stopped sleeping in the bedroom entirely. It faced the backyard and those woods, had windows that looked out at all that darkness, and I couldn't deal with that anymore. I started crashing on the living room couch with the TV on low volume, just background noise. Noise helped somehow, even if it was just the muffled drone of some late-night infomercial selling kitchen gadgets or exercise equipment, even if I wasn't watching or listening. Every single night I'd double-check the deadbolt, would physically test it by pulling hard. Then I'd shove a kitchen chair under the knob as additional security, would pile a few pans in front of the door like a makeshift alarm system that would clatter if anything moved them. Some nights the chair would still be there in the morning exactly where I'd left it, wedged tight under the handle. But the lock would be undone, would be sitting in the unlocked position like someone had carefully turned it. Other times the chair would be tipped over or slid a few inches to the side like someone had quietly moved it out of the way, had pushed it aside just enough to open the door without making noise. Once I found my sneakers sitting outside the back door in the morning, placed side by side neatly like someone had borrowed them for a walk and brought them back when they were done. I hadn't worn those shoes in days. Knew exactly where I'd left them by the front door inside. I started writing things down obsessively, keeping detailed notes. Times, specific details, tiny observations that might mean something. Made myself a kind of checklist. Locked the door at 11:30. Used the green chair tonight, not the wooden one. Left brown boots by the mat, not sneakers. Trying desperately to prove to myself that something real was happening, that I wasn't just losing my grip on reality or experiencing some kind of mental breakdown from isolation and stress. Eventually, I bought a security camera. Just a cheap indoor model from the big box store in the next town over. Nothing fancy or expensive, just something that might give me answers. I set it up in the kitchen aimed straight at the back door, positioned it carefully and tested it multiple times. First night, nothing happened. Recording was clean and uninterrupted. Second night, same thing, just empty kitchen and closed door. Then on the third night, I woke up on the couch to find the door standing open again. I checked the footage immediately on my phone, scrolling back to the relevant time. Only there wasn't any footage, not for the crucial minutes. The recording just stopped completely. Not for the whole night, but for a specific window. It cut off a few minutes before the door opened, according to the timestamp. Just went dark, like someone had reached out and switched it off, or covered the lens. I thought maybe the battery had died, even though it was plugged in. Thought maybe there was some technical malfunction. So I kept it plugged directly into the wall outlet, made sure it had constant power. Still happened. Same result. Every night I tried to catch something on camera. The file would cut off or corrupt right before the moment I needed to see. Right before whatever was happening happened. So I got sneaky, got desperate. Set up a second camera, hidden behind some canned food in the pantry, angled it carefully to catch the first camera in its field of view. That way, if someone was physically tampering with it, if someone was in my house, I'd see them on the backup. Felt clever when I set it up. Felt like I was finally thinking ahead. Didn't work at all. Both feeds went completely dark during the same time window. Both cameras failed simultaneously. Like whatever was doing this knew about both of them, could sense them somehow, or just didn't care about being clever. That's when I started sleeping with a hammer under the couch cushion, keeping it within easy reach. Not because I thought it would actually do much good against whatever this was, not because I had any real plan for using it. Just holding it made me feel like I had a little bit of control left, like I had some agency in my own house. I'd lay there on that couch with one eye metaphorically on the door, one hand wrapped around the wooden handle of the hammer. By that point, I wasn't really sleeping anymore. Not properly. More like drifting in and out of consciousness with the TV buzzing static and the hammer growing warm in my palm from body heat. Then the hallway light started flickering in a pattern that felt deliberate, felt like communication or a warning, always the same exact sequence. 3 quick blinks, pause, one long flicker that lasted several seconds. Only in that hallway. Nowhere else in the house. I counted it obsessively, timed it with my phone, tried different light bulbs thinking maybe it was just a bad bulb or loose connection, flipped breakers in the electrical panel, even called an electrician to come check it out. He came out on a Tuesday, poked around professionally, tested everything with his equipment, didn't find anything wrong with the wiring or the fixtures. Old houses, He shrugged while packing up his testing gear. They do weird stuff sometimes. Probably just needs a new switch eventually, but it's not dangerous. His casual dismissal somehow made it worse. One night, I was standing in the kitchen eating cereal straight out of the box because I couldn't be bothered with bowls and milk anymore, had stopped caring about normal routines. The hallway lights were doing their usual flickering pattern. 3 quick blinks I could predict now. When that final long blink hit, when the light held that dim flicker, the back door clicked open. Not swung violently, not creaked slowly, just clicked. Like someone had turned the handle gently and deliberately, like someone with a key or someone who knew exactly how that door worked. The door eased open maybe an inch or two, just enough to let the night air seep in, just enough to feel the temperature change. I didn't go investigate this time, didn't rush over to look. I grabbed the hammer from where I'd left it on the counter, stepped outside barefoot onto the cold concrete porch, and just stood there, breathing the night air, staring into those trees like I expected something to finally walk out and show itself, like I was daring it to appear. Nothing did, of course, just black trees and brittle dead leaves and silence so complete it felt alive. I stayed outside until the sky started turning gray with approaching dawn, stayed there until my feet were numb and my eyes were burning from not blinking enough. Next day, I nailed the back door shut in broad daylight, feeling slightly crazy but determined. Found a wood plank in the garage, used big nails, left no gaps. I checked my work 3 times, yanked on it to make sure it was solid. It stayed shut finally, stayed closed. That night, I finally crashed in the bedroom again for the first time in weeks, exhausted enough to risk it. I woke up freezing around 3 a.m., woke up because cold air was pouring over me. The bedroom window was wide open, fully open with the screen missing. It had been painted shut when I moved in. I specifically remembered that. I'd tried to open it during the first week with a screwdriver, had tried to scrape at the paint seal and given up because it was stuck so thoroughly. Now it was wide open with cool night air flowing in, curtains moving gently. The screen that should have been there was gone, just missing entirely. I closed that window immediately with shaking hands. Didn't care that I had to force it. Repainted the edges with paint I found in the garage, used half a can to seal it shut. Then I didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Just sat in the living room watching the hallway, light do its little flickering dance. 3 blinks and a long flicker, over and over. Next morning, when I went out to my truck to leave, to escape for a few hours, both doors on the vehicle were standing wide open. Not broken into, no shattered glass scattered around. No scratches on the paint, nothing missing from inside that I could tell. Just open, both driver and passenger side, like I'd left them that way. But I absolutely hadn't. That was it for me. That was the final sign I needed. I drove straight to a cheap motel off the highway without going back inside the house, didn't even pack a bag. Checked in and paid cash for a week, asked for a room on the 2nd floor facing the parking lot where I could see my truck. I never went back to that house except once in daylight with a friend as backup, just to grab essentials and anything I couldn't afford to lose. Put it on the market a month later, sold it for less than I paid, sold it to someone who probably thought they were getting an incredible deal and didn't ask why I was so eager to be rid of it. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they're experiencing the same things I did, if they're also finding doors standing open that should be locked, if they're also lying awake listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all. Try to pretend that place doesn't exist at the end of its cracked gravel road, sitting there with its back door that refuses to stay closed, waiting patiently for the next person who needs somewhere cheap to land.